Hi there, everyone. Welcome back. It's so good to be with you. And today we're going to talk about how to successfully reintroduce foods when you've had food intolerances. So, I'm going to share all kinds of tips and tricks that'll help you, whether you're still down to just a few foods, how to know when you're ready to add foods, or if you've been adding foods, this you'll pick up some new information here today about how to make this more successful for you. And for our practitioners on here, I hope this will give you some ideas for working with your clients or your patients. We're going to be talking about different kinds of food intolerances and all kinds of tips and tricks for getting these foods back on board. Why people are joining, let me go through our disclaimers we do every week that this is for informational, educational purposes. We're not here to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent illness. So do work with your healthcare provider. And you may see some affiliate links. What that means is that Mast Health 360 can make a small commission if you purchase through the link. We like to be fully transparent. We do only recommend products we love, we've tested out, we use in the practice, we use personally. So we're very circumspect about it. It never costs you anything more. And if you'd like to support us back, that goes towards helping us continue to put out all of our free newsletters, our Facebook Lives, our website, and the tremendous amount of work that goes into those, and to keep purchasing these products and testing them out for you guys. All right, our slides here are copyright. And while people are coming on here, let me go through our Q&A reminders. We'll do our Q&A towards the end. Do please keep your questions to the topic that we're covering. So today is on reintroducing foods. And do please only submit your question once. That lets me get to as many questions as I can. If you submit them more than once, it slows me down in answering the questions. And we're not able to do off-topic or in-depth personal health questions. So I always appreciate your understanding. I love seeing who's on with us and where you're from. Thank you for putting this in here. We have Pietro from Brazil. Welcome from Brazil. We've got Darlene from Ontario and all kinds of people on with us. So good to see you all. So if you'd like, say hi, put in where you're from. That's the only way I can see that you're on with me. But I love to see who's here. Let's dive into some information here. So first, what kind of food intolerances are we talking about? I'm really going to focus on beyond gluten and dairy. So I'm assuming you guys know a lot already about gluten and dairy intolerances. I want to focus on these more in-depth things, particularly histamine, salicylates, oxalates, lectins, FODMAPs. So that's what we're going to look at here. And I did want to mention, so Jamie's with us again this week. Those of you who've been around for a while, you're used to seeing Suze, and Suze is shifting into more of our communications and content, and Jamie is stepping in to take over our customer and some of our clinic support. So you're going to be seeing Jamie here. You may also be seeing Cam supporting us. So we just wanted to let you know about the role shift, and I think you'll find that Jamie and Cam are also really, really good at this. They'll help you guys with questions and post info in for you. And Suze has been supporting them. So she's still around. She's just shifting roles a little bit here. All right. So histamine intolerance, you guys know a lot about this. So histamine's an amine. It's involved in all kinds of processes in our bodies. And histamine intolerance happens when our bodies can't break the histamine down as fast as it's coming in or it's building up. So I'm just going to give you a snapshot on these intolerances so that we can then talk about how do we recover from them. So lectins, you all probably know, these are proteins. Cells use them to help recognize each other. They can be found in plants. Some animals can also make them. But lectin intolerance can come from genetic predispositions, an immune system triggers. Mold toxicity is a trigger for lectin intolerance. Stress can be a trigger, and certain nutrient deficiencies. But lectin is more of an immune sensitivity instead of something like histamine where you can't break it down. Lectin is going to be more like the category of wheat where your body is attacking those lectins. Then we've got oxalates. You all know about oxalates, these microscopic crystals. They're found in plants to protect them, their defense mechanism to protect the plants. And people could get oxalate intolerance from things like eating really high oxalates, so you're eating more than you can break down, mold toxicity, and I'll talk here in a minute why that is. If we have leaky gut, we have dysbiosis in the bacteria in the gut, so we're not making the kinds of bacteria that break the oxalates down in the gut. Glyphosate can worsen this, nutrient imbalances, and there are some genetic predispositions towards overproducing oxalates in our bodies. All right, so this is just a background for everybody. And then salicylate intolerance. Salicylates are found in plants, and they're also a defense mechanism. They protect plants from insects and bacteria and fungal issues. We get salicylate intolerance from consuming more salicylates than we can break down. So different pathways from histamine. There's some overlaps with those pathways of histamine, but it's a similar concept to histamine intolerance in terms of the bucket metaphor that we talk about and overflowing that bucket. So mold toxicity can clog up the detox pathways that can break down salicylates. We can be low in the nutrients we need to help get rid of salicylates, so things like sulfur. We have issues with oxalates will compound salicylate intolerance. I talked about the sulfur, one of the nutrients that we need that can help, glycine can help. And then too many inflammatory mast cell mediators like histamine can actually worsen our issues with salicylates. Let's talk about FODMAPs. This is the last of my introductory slides here, so we're on the same page. So we know that FODMAPs, that stands for these big words: fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Those are different kinds of carbohydrates. They're short-chain carbohydrates found in some foods that when they get into the gut, if we have an overgrowth of bacteria in the gut, of the bacteria that ferment those, then that's where we get all the gas and the bloating from these FODMAPs. Things like garlic, onions, Brussels sprouts can be in that category. A lot of fruits, apples. So what leads to that? So SIBO contributes to that. And if we're not producing the kinds of enzymes in our guts that break down FODMAPs, and mold toxicity adds to the load of all of these things. So here's one of the questions we get asked a lot. Are these food intolerances forever? Do I have to eat low histamine, low oxalate, or whatever you're dealing with forever? And fortunately, the answer is most likely no, not forever. So when we address underlying root causes like we do in our MC360 method, then we start to improve our tolerance to these different food categories. So let me talk to you about how we do that. So if we look at oxalates, well, if we work on mold colonization, we're going to reduce oxalates in our bodies by reducing aspergillus production of oxalates. So that's one way that people can be stuck with oxalates, is if we've got aspergillus growing in our guts or in our sinuses. Studies have actually shown that it produces oxalates as part of its cycle. So if we get rid of that, all of a sudden you've taken your oxalate load down quite a bit. If we improve our detox pathways, both by reducing the toxins that are coming into our bodies and supporting our detox pathways, that's going to help with histamines, salicylates, and oxalates. If we improve our mast cell flaring, we're going to create less histamine, and that means that we're going to react less to histamine foods, but also will help us have less mast cell flaring to salicylates and lectins. Then when we improve our gut, we can produce more DAO, which degrades histamine. We can rebalance the oxalate degrading bacteria in the gut. So the ones that eat oxalates, so that can allow us to have more room for more oxalates. And if we rebalance our gut from SIBO, it means that FODMAPs, we can recover from FODMAP intolerance. And the more that we calm those mast cells down, I talked about this a second ago, but calm those mast cells down, we can handle more lectins. Now, I have a footnote here that if we don't have autoimmunity, cancer, cardiovascular history, cardiovascular issues, a history of those, sometimes people might want to stay lower lectin longer term if you have those considerations. Here are some foods that I've chosen to moderate long term, and you may want to as well. So I'll leave this up after I get the list up here if you want to take a screenshot. These really high oxalate foods, so beets, sweet potatoes, almonds, chocolate, Swiss chard, rhubarb, plantain, spinach. These are some of the highest oxalate foods. There's a few others that are up in that category. And this is where a lot of people have gotten into trouble eating healthy. This is how I got into trouble, and where I ended up on a cane and barely able to walk by my late 20s. So I had started cleaning up my diet. I was eating healthfully. I was eating in season and what I could get at the farmer's market. And I would get this incredible joint pain, like walking on ground glass every winter. Well, guess what I was eating in the winters? What was at the farmer's market? The beets, the sweet potatoes, the Swiss chard, the spinach. And then I had replaced gluten with almond flour. So my oxalate load was huge. Now, I think we can get some of these back. I have a little bit of chocolate, not a ton, but I have a little chocolate on occasion. I might eat something that has a couple bites of sweet potato in it or a couple bites of beets, but I'm usually not sitting down with 2 or 3 servings of these. And I watched a wonderful lecture by Sally Norton, which you all probably, some of you know of her. She has a new book out called Toxic Superfoods. And she talked about how our kidneys can only process 100 to 200 milligrams of oxalates a day. So if we have a whole serving of beets and a whole serving of spinach, we just blew past that. And that means those oxalates are going to build in our bodies. So just something to consider there, that we may not want to go back to whole hog eating spinach smoothies. So that's something I'm not going to do. So if you do have these, then just have a little bit, but it doesn't mean you can't ever have any of those again. And I wanted to show you my typical Sunday brunch. So this is a brunch that I had, and show you what I'm eating these days. So first, if you're new here, you need the back information that I was once down to 10 foods, and that counted salt. And I had histamine intolerance, lectin sensitivity, oxalate intolerance, salicylate intolerance, and I had issues with FODMAPs. The only one I'm still really dealing with is the FODMAPs, if I'm getting my gut back. But what this brunch is I had scrambled pasture-raised eggs. I had oyster mushrooms in there, which are higher histamine. Lots of herbs, green onions, turkey bacon, which is higher histamine. A gluten-free whole grain. It was a millet sorghum bagel, cinnamon raisin bagel. So think it was a little higher histamine. Got a little bit of oxalates in there. And then I had a mixture of organic blueberries and raspberries. Blueberries and strawberries with coconut yogurt and toasted tiger nut flakes on top. And then I had honeybush tea, which is fermented. So you can see I had quite a bit of salicylates, histamines, some moderate oxalates. I don't think there's any lectins in there. But this is how far I've come with my foods, from somebody who could only eat 10 foods at one point. So I wanted to share that with you so you have some, hopefully some inspiration to get your foods back. And it took me a while. This was a road to get some foods back. So it didn't happen overnight. But to show you where I came from, which was having, I hadn't cut out all the lectins, but I could have chicken, I could have rice, I could have zucchini or yellow squash. I counted those as separate foods, and carrots, to somebody who could eat like this. And so you probably can as well. Your plate may look a little different than mine, depending on your body, but this is something that's possible here. So some things that how I eat now, just to give you ideas. This may be different for you, but to give you some inspiration here. So I eat moderate amounts of histamines. I freely eat high salicylates now as much as I want, and I don't have any trouble. Lectins, I do choose to moderate because of autoimmune and cancer risk concerns that I have, but I do sometimes eat rice and pressure cooked like kabocha squash. And oxalates, I tend to, I could tolerate a lot more. I moderate, so like I talked about, I don't do like 2 servings of beets. But I eat a little bit of chocolate. That's my one thing in that high oxalate category. So I'll have a half to 1 small square of dark chocolate on occasion. And I just avoid those super high ones. So let's talk about, oh, I got one more on this. I am slowly reintroducing FODMAPs as my gut heals. I've been able to get more Brussels sprouts back on board, and it's coming along. I can dine out in good quality restaurants. I don't eat fast food, but if they have good quality food, then I can eat out, and I probably eat out once a month. I eat organic as much as possible for longevity. I can have a glass of wine or a clean cocktail. I only do that a couple times a year, maybe 3 times a year. And I occasionally have a treat, maybe once a month, something with some sugar in it. Not all the time, but okay. So let's focus on you guys. When to know to start reintroducing foods. So I know we've got questions coming in. So Deborah, I'm going to get to your questions here. And I'll get to those questions at the end. For you guys that jumped on kind of in the middle here, we'll do questions at the end, and then do please just submit your question once. So that helps me get through as many as possible. And we'll do as many on-topic questions as we can for what we're covering today. All right, so how do you know it's time to bring foods back on? Well, when your mast cell flares are much better, so it's easier to tell what's what. So if you're flaring every day and you can't tell what's triggering you, it's really hard to introduce new foods. So you want to get things calmed down. When your GI tract's been improving, you've got a detox going that's going well, you're tolerating it, and you're just going to kind of get a sense that it's time to bring some new foods on. You're going to feel better. You're going to feel sturdier, more resilient, and then you'll know. And I've worked with a lot of people who were quite food restricted, and then all of a sudden they came in and they were like, I think I'm ready to start new foods. So that's where we start identifying. I'm going to show you how I've helped people identify and how we do that in our practice, and how to identify what to bring on board. And then they'll get through that. They'll start in a really slow way of onboarding foods. Then it'll speed up for them. And all of a sudden they'll go, I tried, 5 new foods this week. But they don't start with the 5 new foods. It's a progression. So that's what I want to get to. It's a progression. So I'll show you all of this. So I'm wondering if you've been able to reintroduce new foods. How did you know you were ready? I'm curious what your signals were, what your signs were. So if you want to put that in the comments, I'd love to hear, and we'll share it with everybody. And that way you may have some signs that help somebody else. We may not have thought about that being a way of knowing you're ready to reintroduce foods. Now, how do you know if you're not ready to reintroduce foods? Let's talk about that. So if you try 1 or 2 bites of a new food and you're just really flaring a lot, you have a lot of mast cell flares in general, and it's hard to tell what's happening. If you have a significant amount of nervous system dysregulation, that's going to keep you reacting to foods. So you want to get that calmed down. And if you're still exposed to mold, it may be hard to get new foods on board until you're out of mold exposure and have improved air quality. If you're reacting every time you swallow any food, you definitely don't want to reintroduce foods at that point. So work on the stabilization steps that we talk about a lot on here. And if you're past those foods, but you're still not able to onboard a specific category, let's say you've passed all of these phases. So you're not flaring all the time, nervous system's better, you're out of mold, you're not reacting whenever you eat. But you keep trying foods and you're stuck, it's not working. Well, you may not be ready, for example, to reintroduce histamines. So if histamines are still a problem, could you reintroduce some FODMAPs or could you reintroduce some salicylates? So that's one of the ways you can start to find your way through this. So let's look at some examples and some actual process on how to determine foods you can start reintroducing. So one, it really depends on your sensitivities. Some people come into our clinic and they're like me and they have been reacting to everything. They're down to 10 foods. They're really struggling to eat. So they may have a lot of different food intolerances. But a lot of other people just have, one or two types of food intolerances. They might have histamine and oxalates, but they don't have the rest. So you've got to think about what are your specific food intolerances and then work from there. So you may be just fine with FODMAPs, so you don't have to worry about those. When you are introducing foods, work with one category of food at a time. So that means if you're sensitive to histamines, oxalates, and salicylates, then as you're start by introducing something low in all three of those. Because you don't want to be confused if you react to something that was high in histamines and high in salicylates. Well, which was it that got you? So we'll talk about some ways to do that. And then just start with one food in that category at a time. So for example, if you've got histamine salicylate intolerance, you might start with reintroducing just some higher histamine foods, but keep them low salicylate. And this is where you can use our cross-referenced foods list. Let's look at the example that would cover as many people as possible here. So if somebody had, like me, histamine, salicylate, lectin, FODMAP, and oxalate issues, you would start with foods that were low in all of those categories. So for an example, you might start with adding a new animal protein. This could be trying some lamb or bison or elk or unaged beef, turkey or duck, something that was frozen after slaughter. Could start with wild-caught salmon, and king salmon's usually the lowest histamine. We tend to use Vital Choice for seafood, and we use White Oak Pastures and North Star bison for like unaged beef, unaged bison. You have to watch bison too because it can be aged. And Jamie can put in some links for us with where you can get those, and we have coupon codes with those companies you can use. Some other things that's low in all of these various things, there's white cabbage, iceberg lettuce, rutabaga is called swede in other parts of the world, turnips. So these are low histamine, oxalate, lectin, FODMAP, and salicylate. Millet, decaf purity coffee. You got to watch the coffee. You got to make sure it's actually low histamine. And I found out recently that Bulletproof changed their formulation. So somebody I was working with did fine with Bulletproof for years and recently has been reacting to it. So if you drink Bulletproof, watch how you're doing. If you've had trouble or some flaring, pay attention to that. Chives are low across the board here. Green onion tops, fennel, flat leaf parsley. So I'll put this up and you can have a screenshot. You can grab a screenshot if you want. Pecans, dandelion tea, cilantro, saffron. Carrots are going to be a little higher. Let me back that one out. Let's take carrots off of here because that one really depends on the amount that you're eating in terms of the oxalates. So here's the list if you want a screenshot that would be low across the board for histamine, oxalates, lectins, salicylates, and FODMAPs. So when I have somebody who's really been reacting to a lot of foods and we're not sure what's what, we'll start working through this list and pick a few things to try. Now, how do you choose off of here? I usually just ask people, what have you missed the most? What are you really wanting to introduce? What kind of foods have you missed? And then pick something to work with. Pick something that sounds good. Now, once we're doing that, we're going to introduce them slowly, which I'll show you. So phase 2 would be after you've worked through that list. Phase 2 would be then adding in a little moderate histamine foods, but keep it low with everything else. So that could mean adding in just a little bit of, say, oyster mushrooms. Oyster mushrooms are low FODMAP, low oxalate, lower salicylate, lectin, low lectin, but they're going to have a little bit of histamine. Or it could be some turkey bacon. So starting with some things like that to trial the histamine. So it's the scientific method approach to it. So I hope I'm making sense on that, where you're going to try things, keep a diary, track the patterns. Here's some other examples. So if you've not added in lemon or lime, you could try some lemon or lime. A lot of people who have histamine intolerance are fine with these. And some people, though, are extremely sensitive to those. For some reason, I was always able to do a splash of lemon or lime. You can do a small amount of dried coconut. So that'd bring in a little histamine. Or you could let the leftovers sit in the fridge for 24 hours to test histamine. You could add a few more seafood options. So you could bring in some of the scallops that Vital Choice has, or some of their tuna. We're talking about king salmon, but that's really low histamine. Their cod or their haddock. So these are going to be a little higher histamine. Or if you want to get really fancy, maybe lobster from Vital Choice. Now, I get the seafood from Vital Choice because they are very circumspect about their handling methods. So it's not as high histamine as other places. Now, what if instead you want to start reintroducing salicylates? So here's some foods that you could bring on. You could trial if you're reintroducing salicylates, but keeping all these others low that we talked about. So broccoli, parsnips, watercress, a little bit of macadamia is not a whole hog, but keeping it to 5 or 6 of them. Some blueberries, some radishes, coconut oil, olive oil. Olive oil might have just a smidge of histamine for some people. So keep in mind, if you have salicylate issues, don't choose things that are high oxalate, because oxalates will compound salicylate issues. So that's why I said on the macadamias, keep them to 5 or 6 nuts. Now here's the information on North Star Bison, Vital Choice, and White Oak Pastures. Those are our coupon codes. And Jamie's been popping those into the comments for you as well. And we can get them at the top in the description for this Facebook Live, so you can find these easily. Always trying to get coupon codes for you all. We know, going through this ourselves, that any kind of coupon code really helps. So where to find the foods list? Somebody had a question about how do you find a good list? This was Autumn May. I'll come back to some of these other questions, but you're right. There are so many contradictions online. So on our foods lists, you can go to mastl360.com/food-lists. And this is where you will find all of our different cross-reference lists. Why are there so many contradictions? This is really common, Autumn, and part of it is that a lot of the foods lists were copied from each other. So if there was a mistake in one, it got copied into the next one. Some of it is based on data that was correlating anytime somebody reacted for a food, but they weren't controlling for, were they reacting to histamine, or was that a salicylate, or so on. So our list is based on the most reliable information available, and you may still find some slight differences between our list and, say, the Swiss SIGI list, SIGHI. And that's because of what we've seen in our practice. It may be a difference between the types of how that product is packaged or prepared in Switzerland versus in the United States. And but we're really close with that. Janice Joneja has a really good list. Yasmina Kellamston always had really good, well-referenced lists. So I would use one of those, and you can check ours out. We have these others referenced at the bottom of the histamine list. So you'll have a really clear list. And that's so important because if you're trying to reintroduce foods, or even if you're trying to go low histamine in the first place, if you have a list that says walnuts are okay, and every time you eat walnuts, you're feeling worse and you're not understanding, is that walnuts? Is that something else? Is that the supplement I just took? Walnuts are higher histamine. They're histamine liberator. So that's one of the other things that happen with these lists is that some of them, they put foods that contain histamine, but they didn't take out the histamine liberators. So these are things that either lower our DAO, like black and green tea, or they're things that push our bodies to release histamine, like cinnamon and clove and so on. So hopefully that makes sense. If you are stuck on these things and you need help, we do have a wonderful new practitioner in our clinic, and we're continuing to work on expanding. So I'm very excited to say we're taking applications again. So you're welcome to apply if you'd like, and you can find more information there on our website. All right, I want to take you through now specifically histamine. What if histamine is your only issue? So you can see how we work with that. So I'm giving you a few different examples because there's so many different ways food intolerances show up again. So let's get through these. I've got a couple tips for you on how to get new foods on board, and then we'll do questions. So 3 phases of the low histamine diet. What if you only have histamine intolerance? So phase 1, I call this kind of back to basics. That's your elimination phase. It might be 6 months. If you have a lot of challenges like I did, it may be a bit longer than that. This is where you're taking out your foods that are high histamine, histamine liberating, and DAO blocking. You're going to avoid other things that can be triggers like dairy, except most people can do ghee, eggs, fish, no packaged or processed foods, freezing all your leftovers after cooking. And then if you're going to eat in a restaurant, I always took my own meat and had it prepared. So I would order like steamed veggies or steamed rice and veggies. And then I'd slip my little container of chicken that had been thawing on the way to the grocery or to the restaurant. And then I put that on my plate and mix it in. So in this phase, I did not order meat at restaurants. And then if you don't have triple salicylates, you're going to eat as many nutrient-dense herbs and vegetables with histamine lowering nutrients as you can, because that helps support your mast cells and your histamine degrading pathways, as well as your detox pathways. And keep a food diary. Then this is going to take you into how to reintroduce. So low histamine diet, if this is all we're worried about with reintroducing, you'd make a change every 3 to 4 days, add a little bit of a new food or a couple extra bites of a new food. Continue with your food diary. And I usually have people start with 1 bite and wait 3 or 4 days. If that was well tolerated, then you go to 2 or 3 bites, give that a couple of days, maybe 3 or 4 days. Then you're going to double it and go to about 4 to 6 bites, wait 3 or 4 days, then you do a full serving. And you're going to work on the nutrient-dense high histamine foods. So we're not jumping into like a candy bar or something like this. We're going to go into something that you missed, but it's nutrient-dense, like strawberries, for example. And then you continue to avoid those processed or packaged foods, and be careful with dining out and meat at this phase. You're going to start working with restaurant meat in the next phase. You keep freezing your leftovers, keep your stressors low and all those other triggers. And as best as you can, you rotate your foods and you're diversifying. So you're trying to add in more variety. But you're going to hold off on this super high histamine foods in this phase. You're introducing kind of moderate levels or moderately higher histamine foods. Then, when you've had some serious healing and you're ready to go gung-ho, you keep giving yourself every 3 to 4 days for a change to make sure it's working. Continue with the food diary. Bring in those high nutrient, high histamine foods, but don't have too many high histamine foods per day. So even though I'm able to eat so many more things, you saw my higher histamine breakfast or my brunch. I didn't later in that day have a whole lot of more strawberries and smoked salmon and things like that. That might have tipped my bucket over, and I might have been itching and trouble sleeping that night if I added a lot more. So that was my high histamine meal for the day. And then I kept it lower after that. So you're still going to reduce those stressors as well. But we've got more in a blog post on this on reintroducing histamine foods that gives you some food ideas for histamine is the only thing you're working on. All right, let's wrap up with these tips for onboarding new foods. How do you get them on board? So I have people cook, this says a couple, but actually a few servings and freeze in the amounts you're going to try it. So let's say, for example, you're going to try, let me think of something that you might bring on board. Let's say oyster mushrooms. And I'm going with the oyster ones because they're lower FODMAP, but could be button mushrooms if you don't have FODMAP issues, or shiitake, whatever. So you would get enough to cook a couple servings worth. Then you take the day you cooked it, 1 bite, and you're going to freeze the rest. So the rest you put in like a 2-bite little container, 4-bite container, about a 8-bite or a normal serving container. And then you'd freeze those. So then when you pull those back out, when you're ready to try new food, you've already got it ready to go. When you're ready to try the next size of serving, you've got it ready to go. So you're going to pull out your 2-bite serving. You'll try that, give yourself 3 or 4 days. Then you pull out the 4 or 5-bite serving. And you're trialing just one new food at a time. So don't mix. Today I'm trying mushrooms, tomorrow I'm trying strawberries, and the next day pineapple. That's going to get a little confusing. So just kind of stay with one food at the beginning. So here's a little schedule. If you've been really sensitive, then day 1 would be a small bite. Day 2 and 3, you're going to give yourself time to see how you do. Day 4, you get 2 bites. Day 5 and 6, those are your days off. You're going to see how you do. Day 7, you try 4 bites, see how you do. And then day 10, you're going to try a small serving. That might be 4 ounces of some king salmon or half a cup of cabbage, whatever you're going to try. And then once you're tolerating foods better and your symptoms improve, you can go faster. Or if you're not really sensitive, you may not have to go this slowly. But your body will guide you in the pace that you need. So I'm going to leave that up for a minute if you want to grab a screenshot of that to help you think about the schedule that might work for you. And you have to modify these things. So you've always got to see what do you need, what works for you. Let's wrap up by talking about, can you ever eat normally again? I've gotten this question quite a bit. Can I eat normal again? So I think it depends on what is normal. So if we're talking about normal being normal in Western culture, or what's often called a standard American diet, a SAD diet, SAD, this would mean regularly eating high levels of refined carbs, sugar, and bad quality fats like trans fats. So my question is, it is possible to eat those again, but do you really want to? Because this kind of diet is absolutely clearly linked to not just increased risk of MCAS, but cancers, cardiovascular issues, strokes, dementia, so many kinds of risks. So do we really want to go back to eating McDonald's and Taco Bell and just or your typical Pizza Hut kind of pizza. I'm not interested in that. I know some people may be, but if you are, then know that the more you eat that, the more you're increasing these other health risks. Now, can you go back to eating healthfully again? Absolutely. It's really likely you can increase the number of foods, healthy foods you can tolerate, and especially when you're addressing those underlying root triggers. So, can you eat like I showed you that I had for brunch? Most likely, yes, absolutely. Can you eat in restaurants again? Yes. Can you eat at family events again or social events with friends? Probably. I always ask what they're having, and then I offer to bring something that everybody would enjoy, because sometimes they're having, like, I just don't eat gluten at all. Sometimes they're having lasagna and it's made with wheat noodles. So I'll offer to bring a salad, and I'll have the salad, and then I'll skip the lasagna. But there's lots of ways you can get back to having a great life. So I'm going to get into questions here. And for anybody that's new, if this is your first introduction to us, we have got lots of resources on our website. And, well, we're here on Facebook, but you can find all of our past videos there as well. And jump on our email list if you're not, because we send extra stuff out to our email list that only goes out that way. So Deborah's asking about thiols and sulfur. Want to get back to those healthy foods. What does it mean? How to do it? So Deborah, this is something that where people have struggled with sulfur, I've almost always found two reasons. Doesn't mean there's only two, but this is what I usually see in the people that I've worked with. One is hydrogen sulfide SIBO and getting the SIBO in the gut addressed. And then the other can be a problem with molybdenum, too low molybdenum. And supporting molybdenum can often help in processing sulfur. So I don't know your symptoms, and that often can help a practitioner work with you to determine where this is coming from and where the challenge is, so you know how to support yourself. It can also be trouble with sulfur because of high oxalates. So if you have high oxalates, sulfur will actually push oxalates out of the body, which is helpful. But if you do a lot of sulfur and you have a huge oxalate load, you can push it too fast. So I'm always looking at, well, what's underlying? What's the problem? The thiols or the sulfur is not the problem. The histamine is not really the problem, or the oxalates or salicylates. They're not really the problem. The problem is what's going on underneath that's affecting those pathways. So I think there are a lot of ways to do that, Deborah, and it's a great question. So those are my top of my head thoughts for you. Anytime we get mold toxicity addressed, people tend to recover really well. Annette is asking about how do you test for these intolerances? So we have a lot of blog posts, Annette, on our website. They'll get into more details for you. It's a lot of information for us to go over in the Q&A section here, but it's a great question. So I think you'll find that if you look at our main blog post, say on oxalates, for FODMAPs and so on. Deborah, did I have trouble with thiols? So I've had a lot of trouble with sulfur, and in particular, I had to be careful with eating sulfur for a while. Molybdenum really helped me. Now I have to watch the hydrogen sulfide SIBO and not going super high. Some of that's just FODMAP. So again, figuring out what it is, because I can have arugula and I'm just fine, but I can't do a lot of onions and garlic, for example. So I don't know if that's showing up the same way as it did for you, Deborah, but I hope that I gave you some info that opens a door for you or is helpful in some way. Nancy, how do you know if you have oxalate issues? Another good question. So if you go onto our website, and Jamie might be able to post these links in for you all, we have an article that goes into oxalates and the symptoms. Some of the common symptoms are joint muscle pain, fibromyalgia type pain, urinary pain and burning, trying to think what, sandy, gritty eye excretions instead of goopy, sleepers that you get in your eyes. There'd be They can be gritty. Gritty or sandy stool can be a symptom, cloudy urine. And you may not have all of those. You might have some combination. There's lots of other possibilities as well. They can trigger skin issues. And I'll just refer you from there over to our blog, and that way you get a real complete picture. All right, let's see what other questions we have. Elena, can you try mushrooms if you have mold toxicity? So I do still have mold toxicity, and I'm able to eat mushrooms now. The reason mushrooms are typically not allowed on a mold-free diet or low mold diet, one is that they often do end up molding in the grocery store, so they have mold on them. I'm actually growing my own mushrooms from this little spray kit from, I've used North Spore is one of the companies I've used, and Forest Origins is the other. I'm growing oyster mushrooms. They're very easy to grow. So I know that mine are really fresh and they're not going to have mold on them. But the other reason some people have trouble with mushrooms beyond mold can be just that they're higher histamine. Not everybody, but some people have an allergy to molds, and also that can then kind of expand into an immune reaction to anything in the fungal kingdom. That has not been as common because if we think about it, the fungal kingdom is a whole kingdom, just like the plant kingdom. So if we have a sensitivity to a particular plant, doesn't mean, like I have trouble with wheat, doesn't mean that I can't have millet or sorghum or anything else like that. So we just have to see where we are. But a lot of people are in trouble with mushrooms either because they were old and moldy or they're higher histamine. And that's something I really suggest people bring in later in their food introduction, but not to have immediately, when you're trying to sort through or you're trying to calm things down. Oops, sorry about that. I don't know what I just did to my slides, but that's not what I meant to do. Okay, let me take us back to questions here. Andrea's asking, I missed the beginning. Did you say smoked salmon? I did say smoked salmon, Andrea, as an example of something that is high histamine. So earlier, I covered my brunch and how I can eat today, how far I've come from 10 new foods. And so the reason I mentioned smoked salmon was that I didn't have a high histamine brunch and then go on and have other things like smoked salmon. They were really high histamine. I'm just talking about not getting too much load in one day. Jody, should gluten be off the menu forever? I think it depends. For me personally, gluten is off the menu forever for me. I have significant reactions. The last time I had wheat was several years ago. It was my husband's birthday. I think it was 7 years ago. And somebody had made him a banana cake, and I thought, I've been off wheat for so long, I'll probably be fine if I have a small piece. And I had a small piece, and the next day my joints hurt so badly it was hard to move, and I had eczema from my fingertips up to my elbows for a month. My body hates gluten, so for me, gluten's off the menu forever. It's also so high in glyphosate, even hard to get organic wheat without glyphosate. Other people may be okay, and I think it really depends on your body's reactions. It depends on your health goals. I'm really concerned about autoimmune and cancer risk for myself because of my own history. So I get to see too often, really up close, what happens for people. And so I know what the risks are, and I know what to expect, and I know what's going to take from me if I develop significant autoimmunity or if I develop cancer. So that's why for me, it's off the menu. It doesn't mean it has to be for everybody. It depends on what your health goals are, what your risks, what your concerns are. I would make sure, though, that it stays organic, because the amount of glyphosate in wheat is astronomical, and it is a major health disruptor. It's a big deal. Okay, Wallace. Used to be able to eat gluten-free bread. Now I get sores in my mouth. What causes this? I don't know, Wallace. It could be oxalates. It could be an immune reaction. It's hard to tell without knowing your case, but something in there is triggering you for sure. And let's see, Amy, how long does it usually take to get back to a more expansive diet? It's been 2 years for me. Am I going too slow? Not necessarily, Amy. I just don't know how how much of the root parts you've worked on. It's so hard to tell not knowing your case, but it really depends how fast people can go, depends on a few things. Depends on if we're out of mold exposure or not. And there's been a lot of times I really thought I was out of mold exposure, and then I wasn't. And we just found a little bit more mold in our bathroom this past week. So we had to get that remediated. And, we keep chipping away at it, but it's hard. Depends on how much we've addressed trauma and addressed our nervous system. And then some of us just have to go slower than others. I can take a lot of supplements now. And some things I can start with a whole capsule. Other things I have to start with sprinkles, things that are killing agents, antifungals, and things like that. I got to go slow on still. So I don't think we have to have any set pace in mind or time in mind. And that's why I try not to give people solid time frames. It took me, I think, about 3 years to introduce very many new foods. But then at some point I started turning the corner and I could go faster. And that's all you're looking for, Amy, is what's your pace? That's what matters the most, is what's your pace? And are the underlying pieces getting addressed? Toxicity, triggers, external triggers, stress triggers, is your gut improving? And those are typically the biggest things to get those foods back on board. Limbic and vagal work can really help too. Wallace, do you take patients? What does that look like? So we always call them, thank you for the question. We always say clients since we're a consulting clinic, and we are taking applications. So I popped that link up, but if you missed it, Wallace, it's mastl360.com/application. And I'll have some information out here in a few weeks about our new model, but we've expanded to a multi-practitioner model, which I'm loving, and it's going really well. So I like what we're doing here with our practitioner team. Darlene, where does asparagus fit in? Was using organic, it was out of season, soaking it in baking water for 20 minutes, eating the non-organic, getting itchy all over. I don't know if soaking it's going to get the pesticides out, so that may be. Asparagus is a wonderful food, good detox food. It does have some FODMAPs, and then it can, may just have those pesticides. So I don't know for sure, Darlene, but asparagus is a wonderful food if you tolerate it. So I hope you can find organic, maybe frozen. I know it's not as good as fresh, but I use a lot of frozen in the winter. Okay, Marie. All right, Marie Noel, is there one list of foods low in histamine, oxalates, and lectins on your site? So Jamie can point you to our lists. We do have on the lists that's cross-referenced with what's really high oxalate and what's a lectin. So you're going to find that. Just look at the key there on the list. And Marie, in terms of the laboratory testing for oxalate problems, let me refer you to our blog post because there's a lot of nuances with that to know about. They do have some markers. Sometimes it reveals it, sometimes not. So if you don't see it show up, doesn't mean there's not an oxalate issue. So you get a little more info there. Pietro, what intolerance causes mucus and asthma? Anything that's triggering your mast cells can. So it's not necessarily specific to a particular intolerance. It can just be, what are your mast cells unhappy about? Annalisa, does sourdough mitigate gluten sufficiently? Depends on how sensitive you are. So some people it does, some people it doesn't. So again, it depends on sensitivity. It's not something I want to risk for myself. It does not get rid of all the gluten, so it won't take gluten grain and make it gluten free at all. Yeah, it's one of those things that you just have to see for yourself how sensitive your body is. Courtney, just getting out of mold help open up food options. Yes, I see this often. This and addressing the nervous system, stabilizing the mast cells. Those are the three biggest things I see to help people get more foods on board. There's a lot of other small things that you can do, but those are the three biggies. And then Kate's asking, what can you eat to gain weight? That's so individual. It's a good question. Typically, to gain weight, people are looking at bringing on some carbs and some fat, but then you got to look at what can you tolerate? Where are you? So that's one of those real individual questions there. All right, I'm going to hit the last few questions here. Kate's asking, with ghee, what if you're lactose intolerant or lactose tolerant? If you can tolerate it, how to use it? So I'm not sure if I fully understand. So ghee doesn't have lactose. It has lactose and casein removed. So there's no milk sugar, there's no milk protein. There is butyrophilin, which is what helps repair the gut. Some people do have an immune reaction to it. It's not as common, but it can happen. If you tolerate ghee, how to use it? You just use it in cooking. You can use it like butter as a butter replacement for anything where you would use butter. I've even people with salicylate intolerance, and I've used it on skin as a moisturizer as well. All right, we hit all the questions. It's so good to be with you here today, everybody. We're going to be back next week, and so wonderful when we come together as a group. Next week, we're going to cover an interesting topic we've had a lot of questions on about coffee enemas. So I'm going to talk about coffee enemas, how to know if you might be a good candidate for trying coffee enema, how to know if you definitely should not try a coffee enema, and then if you're going to do it, how do you do it safely and gently, and at which point in our process in the MC360 method would you introduce it if you're going to. So lots of stuff coming up for you guys on coffee enemas. We will see you next week at the same time at 2:00 Eastern. And in the meantime, be really gentle with yourself. Be really loving. Remember that the more kind and loving you are to yourself, the more safe you'll feel. And the more safe you feel, the more your mast cells will feel safe enough to calm down and relax. So just being loving and compassionate with yourself is much easier said than done, but is in itself a limbic system practice. So I hope you all will practice that this week. It's an ever evolving practice, one I'm constantly working on myself. And I'll see you guys next week.